Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite A-lister food writers. It's about life through the prism of food. And this week I'm with Sam and Sam Clark, the husband and wife team behind Moro, to talk about 25 years of amazing British food culture, and with the publication of their latest book, Moro Easy, the legacy and influence of cookbooks.
Our restaurant's given us a fantastic and fascinating career. And I think now it's time really to get out there and going to schools and reaching out to communities. I think that's the way, because there's no one really better to talk with conviction and passion and understanding than a chef, really. Sam
and Sam are among the most influential chefs in modern British cuisine, bringing delicious, rustic, Moorish cooking to Britain back in the 1990s. We met on the morning after the Queen had died, while the media was having a field day discussing who we are at the end of the Elizabethan era. I asked them to take me back to when Britain was just waking up to how food, like music and fashion, was about much more than what we were eating.
I think there were signs that there was a real demand for delicious food, and there was also people could afford delicious food, and that sort of combination. And so it was starting to change, that it wasn't just for the elite, because London had always had, great restaurants, but it was really just for the very rich. And then there was this change of which we were part of, where, like the Eagle, wanted to have great food. I think there was a realization with people traveling that in other countries, great food wasn't just for the rich, and it was for everybody. And I think that's what was becoming apparent. People were demanding great food, but not at great prices, and or anyway, they could afford more.
My take on it is that there were these 3 groups of storytellers. There was the BBC in Wood Lane, White City, who were kind of having all their meetings at 192 and Kensington Place and Sally Clark's. There was the group in Groucho's who were going to Alistair Little. And later, they were at the Observer and the Guardian, whose local pub was the Eagle. Yes. Those people were the storytellers, creating an idea of a new birth of the cool. It was the next big thing. So, yes, you're right about accessibility to food. I have to say, for certain people, it was still people with an expense account, perhaps, or, cool young things. It wasn't for the masses. That that still hasn't happened. We've got a very dualistic kind of food culture, haven't we, where we've got food poverty and food insecurity in the 6th richest country in the world. And we've got this extraordinarily rich and vibrant food culture that represents cultures from all over the world. So that's the kind of trajectory. I'd love to kind of take you back to the 1990s at the Eagle and sort of earwig on some of the kind of stories that you were talking to with those journalists at the Guardian and the Observer. People were literally writing the story while they were eating your food. How aware were you of that?
Yes, every place where we worked had a story. So, the River Cafe, it was, Rose Gray living with her family, growing up in Tuscany, and Ruthie having the influence of Richard Rodgers's mother and family. And then, and the Eagle was the story of David Eyre, being brought up in Mozambique and the sort of Portuguese influence. With us, obviously, journalists love a story, and with us it was how we travelled in our camper van and we drove to the Sahara Desert, researching recipes, trying to get the authentic flavours. And so, I think there was this, people appreciated that link and that sort of authenticity in the food that was being created. And the journalists, as you said, who are in these different areas of London being as part, like latched on and liked those stories as well.
Yeah, and also, the Eagle pub was the first gastro pub of its kind. So, it was very accessible, it was informal, it was bustling, it had wonderful energy, it was rustic flavours, it was just vibrant, it was alive in every way. And that's why there were queues around the block.
Yeah. And this was before TV chefs like Jamie Oliver and Nigella had sold us a whole new idea of who we are through what we eat. I mean, it was only a few years before that people were not really travelling. It was really with the birth of Thatcherism that young people were exploring the world. They had a bit more money. Cheap flights had enabled that. So your food was kind of like encouraging people to travel, but also reminding them of the wide open road. How aware were you of what it was doing for other people?
Well, I mean, we've always liked the line that, food has the ability to transport you to a different place, in the same way that music does. I mean, it's so evocative, and so we like the idea that you could open, a recipe book or eat at our restaurant and really be transported into a little souk and get those same sort of flavours, or being in Seville, then a little tapas bar, and just and it be able to transport people to a different place and a different time, and that was really exciting. And I think obviously it did make people want to travel because we're so enthusiastic and we love exploring and we're adventurers, really. So I think obviously the two went hand in hand.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the idea of music as well, because, that's the other thing we're very good at in Britain is making things very cool and making up new stories. And we did it with music and fashion in the 1960s, 1970s, we've always done it, really. We kind of make it up, make it cool, and then it becomes our story, doesn't it? Compared with, yes. I mean, last time we met was at the British Library and we were talking about 13th century Andalusian food culture, which hasn't really changed, which is quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because, it is the instability of our food culture that allows us to change and move and kind of, be very fluid, which is a joy. So, let's talk about some of the other storytellers who are coming in terms of the chefs. You've mentioned Ruth Rogers and Rose Gray. Peter Gordon was a huge influence at that time. There were lots of people bringing their travels to pubs and restaurants and really exploding that whole restaurant scene in London. Did you kind of meet up with each other and chat about it all? What was the kind of the feel of this kind of cool group of people who were literally changing the way we ate?
I think we were all slightly in our bubbles. Obviously there was the River Cafe camp, and then there was the sort of Michelin star French camp, and then there was the St John's camp, and there was the Peter Gordon camp, and they all, we all had our, different mantras and our different takes on things.
Super friendly whenever we did get the chance to meet up with them. But, working in a restaurant, you'll sort of head down and, there day and night. And so, there's not a lot of chance for social, too much social stuff. So.
But what it was doing was kind of opening Britain to ideas that great stories came from the world. We were much more outward looking than perhaps France or Spain or Italy were at that time, and that is to our credit. And, one of the things I've been thinking about as I've been listening to this massive storytelling about, who we are in relation to, the end of the Elizabethan era is how outward looking we are and where we are in terms of our relationship with the world. Before we go into your food moments, which are very much set in your Spain, where are we as a nation in terms of our food? Bearing in mind the cost of living crisis, bearing in mind the climate crisis, bearing in mind the new Prime Minister and, this kind of conservative approach to other cultures. Who are we?
Well, I think we are. There's definitely the haves and have-nots. There's definitely the people who embrace exotic and different flavours and people who literally do eat the same food as they've always eaten day in, day out. Sort of, chicken on a Saturday, fish on a Friday, and sausages and bacon. I mean, it's just sort of... I think there is a bit of a north-south divide as well. I think, generally speaking, people like simpler food in the north of England, and but there's also the availability of the food. I mean, here, because London is the great melting pot, we literally can get everything within a 10-minute walk. So it's a combination of demand, but also it's just harder for people to nip out in in Lancashire and get pomegranate molasses, whatever it might be.
Although you can get anything online if you wanted, of course, and there are fantastic chefs up in Lancashire.
I know that is the big change.
And that push towards local seasonal food, which started with 192 perhaps and Sally Clark, maybe food culture has a great role to play in the way that we change the way that we think about how we live. I hope, certainly with the climate crisis, there has been such a massive change in the last 30 years in the way that we eat and the food that we decide to buy for whatever reason, to be cool, for flavour or for whatever that is. The influence of people like you is phenomenal. What can we do to kind of encourage that sort of storytelling so that everyone starts to eat more locally and seasonally and reduce waste and all the things that we know that the Spanish have always been doing as part of their cooking? And you'll talk about that in your food moments, about back of the fridge cooking, about using leftovers, about, picking food from the land and using it seasonally because that reduces waste. What do you think about the role of the chef in changing the way that we consume?
Well, I mean, we're always mad on foraging and seasonality and things. I mean, if people go on walks with us, we can point 20 different things that you can eat on a walk. And we like to think we do excite people about the possibilities and also what parts of the plant you can eat and all of those sort of things which usually do get thrown away. So, I mean, also now we're realising that it's where people are talking about the nutrient density of things. So basically, I'm afraid to say that the vegetables we buy in supermarkets probably have half the nutritional value as they did 40 years ago. But by the same token, if you eat wild forage things, they're just so packed with these incredible vitamins and minerals that you don't get in conventional vegetables and fruit. All of that sort of thing is really exciting. And I think if people realise that, they will become stronger, have better health and less need for medicines and drugs to keep them healthy.
Totally. I mean, the word foraging kind of sounds terribly sort of middle class, but it's actually blackberry picking.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it, at this time of year?
I mean, but if you have a handful of blackberries, what they possess is just off the chart from a mineral and vitamin point of view.
And this is exactly what Moorish food is. It's exactly what most Mediterranean food is all about. Local people picking, buying and cooking local food. Take us back to when you went on that famous camper van trip, when you were on your honeymoon back in the 90s, and you went through the Mediterranean and to the Middle East and saw people picking their equivalent of blackcurrants in season, and it changed your life. So those people who haven't heard your story about the camper van, take us back. Why did you choose to go where you went?
Well, we didn't want to cook Italian food because we thought we couldn't really do it justice after working at the cafe for so long. And we wanted to be...
And that's the River Cafe.
That's the River Cafe. So we wanted to forge our own way. I travelled a lot in Pakistan, and I was very interested because I got Pakistani friends, and I was, just swept away with the sort of romance of the culture and the mosques and the music and everything. And then when we came back to Europe, and travelled in Spain, I just was amazed by the similarities in the architecture from Lahore in Pakistan to Cordoba in Spain and all of the great cities of Andalusia. And then, with a bit of research, we realised there was this wonderful link between the food of the East and Spain, the Moors being in Spain for such a long time. So we called it the saffron cinnamon link. And we just wanted to explore that, and we loved that sort of exotic side of Mediterranean cookery, and we loved that cultural influence that the East had. And so we drove through Spain and crossed over Gibraltar to Tangier and Morocco, and then we headed south to the Sahara, and we travelled in the Sahara. Met Bedouin tribes people and ate in the desert. And it was just, we were full of awe and amazement, all the wonderful things we were tasting and learning, whether it be desert truffles or picking wild asparagus in the Sierras, and it just took our imagination, and it was very exciting, wasn't it?
I mean, we were like sponges. We were so eager to learn. So, we were about to open a restaurant in 6 months' time, and we really, really wanted to come back with kind of unusual dishes and learn about things that that we could replicate in the restaurant for our customers. And so we were just on this sort of high the whole sort of 3 months, just going from one village to another.
We were lucky also that when we got back, a wonderful company called Brindisa was starting up, and so suddenly we could buy the wonderful anchovies from Ortiz, and we could buy the Moorish wind-dried tuna from the Atlantic, and all of those sort of things, and the olive oil and the olives, and so it was far easier and the piquillo peppers and the paprika, so it was far easier to get that authenticity, because the timing was good as this company was starting off as well. So that was sort of key. We had the ingredients to make things taste exactly how they should, which you need.
Yeah, absolutely. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Sort of taking the image of blackberry picking and taking it to desert truffles in the Sahara. It's the same thing, but it does blow your mind. Both of them blow your mind, actually. It's wonderful. Yeah. Let's start going through some of the food moments from your new book. So this is Moro Easy. Not that it was difficult in the first place. Take us, why? Publishers always want the easy version of something amazing, but why did you decide to do Moro Easy?
Well, originally we were going to do a Moro 25 because Moro is 25 this year. Our publisher, said, well, why don't you think about doing a Moro Easy? And initially I wasn't sure, but then I thought, well, actually, this is a challenge to write in a slightly different way and create recipes that are no less delicious, but are kind of have simpler methods, a few less ingredients, but while still retaining all the kind of punch that the Moro flavours have. And so actually we really enjoyed the exercise and have kept the recipes simple, but delicious, and we're happy with what we've created.
And what about the cultural sort of implications of this? A lot of these foods haven't changed for, centuries, and they are to do with time and, getting them locally. Taking them and making them easy and accessible is fantastic for us, but what does that do to the authenticity of where it comes from?
Well, I think again, it goes back to the language of spice and the language of the ingredients. So a cumin in the right position, or a bit of manchego cheese with the right combination of things, suddenly that brings the whole dish together, and it gives it an identity and it grounds it. And that's sort of where it's as simple as that. You only need one or two ingredients to give a recipe. It's sort of cultural and spiritual anchor, really.
Yeah. I was talking to Noor from Ottolenghi Test Kitchen this week, and we were talking about the cost of living crisis, and she was saying, there's a real opportunity now. We have so many different ideas to play with our food. To make something like an egg on toast, or beans on toast, I think we were talking about, really delicious by borrowing an idea from somewhere else. And that's you can zhuzh up anything with a little bit of cumin, can't you? So you're actually spending very little, but you're taking the skills from this massive sort of melting pot of ideas. This is the first food moment, labneh, sun-dried tomato, coriander and fennel seeds. So easy, really not expensive. Comes from Istanbul. Tell us about that food moment.
Yes, so on one of our many trips, we visited a local, very sort of foodie chef called Shemza, and we'd been making labneh in the restaurant right from the beginning. So making our own yogurt, we make 50 litres of yogurt a day, and then some of that gets strained into the labneh cheese, and then really simply you just sort of spread it out on a plate, and then the flavours come from olive oil that we flavour with the garlic and the whole coriander and fennel seeds and some finely chopped sun-dried tomatoes and a few Turkish chilli flakes. And the oil sort of goes red and the spices go nutty, and then you just simply spoon that hot oil on top. It transforms it into something completely different.
I mean, before people start shouting and saying that doesn't sound very simple, making 30 litres of yogurt.
No,
we mix for the home cook. What's really delicious is getting some delicious Greek yogurt and mixing it with some cream cheese, and that makes this fantastic or very easy alternative to reducing 30 litres of milk and then adding live culture.
I was going to come to that bit.
Yeah, the problem about making labneh at home, I find, is that you put it in your J-cloth, you leave it to strain, and you lose all the yoghurt.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, that's a case with all cheese making, isn't it? I mean, that's why cheese is quite expensive, is because you throw away an awful lot of the milk.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Use your Greek yoghurt and make it that way. Putting roasted beetroot on labneh, the most beautiful thing. The bleeding of those juices into the labneh. God, that's so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Your second food moments. So this is courgette, lemon, basil and manchego cheese. I'm so making this at the weekend for friends. You went for lunch in the campo in the countryside in Andalusia and had this local seasonal produce.
I mean, I don't think really people are very familiar with raw courgette, but I think it's one of the nicest ways to eat. We think it's one of the nicest ways to eat courgette. And again, it was just by chance. We were just staying with friends, and they knew this sort of ramshackle little family restaurant, which was just some hippies really, which put a shack beside their allotment, and they gave us this raw courgette salad. So you slice the courgettes pretty thinly. I don't think they have to be actually that thin. And then you salt them, which makes them go limp and really crunchy. And then you squeeze them dry, and then dress them with lemon and oil, and some either mint or basil, and then have it with some cheese on top, like manchego but any sort of delicious hard cheese would do. I love aged Goudas and things and all those sort of things. But we had it with nice aged manchego, and that's really delicious. But raw courgette is a real revelation. And it's so quick and easy because, you don't need a frying pan even. You just sort of salt it, 10 minutes, squeeze it and dress it. And so we love that. It's one of our favourite things in the summer and autumn, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, this would cost nothing, especially if you were growing your own courgettes, which are pretty easy to grow as well. The thing that, I work for the Food Foundation. I make a podcast with young food ambassadors who, report from the front line of food poverty. And it's very difficult to talk about, I will talk to them about raw courgettes and manchego cheese, but I know what they're going to say. This is almost free food, and it is the answer to the difference between heating and eating, because you're talking about raw courgettes and how to make. It's just a few little skills that make food really, really, really cheap and incredibly nutritious. But there's always that sort of shtick about it, isn't there? That it's terribly sort of middle class and inaccessible. But, you're talking about food from the campo, food from the countryside here. How on earth can we persuade people in this country to eat everyday food really simply?
I think obviously chefs are influential and also they're passionate, and hopefully their passion is infectious. And I think, speaking personally, I think, we've got a responsibility now as chefs. Our restaurant's given us a fantastic and fascinating career. And I think now it's time really to get out there and start, going to schools and meeting people and reaching out to communities. I think that's the way, because I think there's no one really better to talk with conviction and passion and understanding than a chef, really. Yeah. And I think as one gets older and harder to tread the boards in a sort of really fast and furious, high-pressure environment, our skills, probably aged chefs are better to teaching and educating. It's probably where the energy should be switched to.
Well, absolutely. And, remember what we were talking about right at the beginning was this storytelling. Don't ever underestimate the ability of chefs to tell stories that have literally changed the way we live and eat. So, yeah, absolutely. Your third food moment, scallops and Albarino wine. Oh, my goodness. Tell us about this one.
Well, I mean, winemakers always have a knack for showing off their wines with food. I mean, that's what, one of the great pleasures of life, the combination of wine and food. And, I mean, a scallop is a sort of miracle of nature. It's a thing of great beauty, a prize, and we're very lucky in the UK because on the west coast of Scotland, they just, still got the best scallops in the world. And it's a sort of, you could argue it's a similar geography in some degrees for the Atlantic and Galicia and where this dish comes from. But, I mean, they're a miracle thing. I mean, I think they've got to be one of the most extraordinary, wonderful ingredients, and people dive for them, and they pick them off the floor, and they're very special price things. Anyway, it's a proper thing, and so when I was in Galicia, I wasn't with Samantha actually. We were on a wine trip in where they have lots of wonderful Albarino wines, and they literally just had the scallop in the shell and put a little bit of butter and spring onion and a drizzle of Albarino and put it in the oven. And then that was the most delicious dish you've ever eaten in your life with a chilled Albarino. So it's sort of basically poached in a little bit of white wine. And that was pretty much it. But then the scallop can sing and can express itself and and just be the most delicious, special, raw ingredient from nature.
I love that. It's the beauty is in the simplicity and in the local produce. And that moment of just putting it together, it takes very few skills. Once you know how to do that, you can do it forever.
But it is a treat.
Oranges, though, very cheap. Now, take us to your house in Spain. You take your staff down there and you make the jams and the marmalades from the local oranges. Just give us that smell of oranges from where you live in Spain.
So we have a house between Seville and Cordoba, and with a little garden that has 3 orange trees, 2 Seville orange and 1 eating orange, and a lemon tree. And just from those trees alone, it's enough to make enough marmalade for the whole year, and also enough preserved lemons for the whole year for the restaurant. So, as you say, in sort of January, we take, 10, 15 of our staff, and we just give them a lovely time. But and during the day, they're, cutting and chopping and slicing oranges and lemons and stuffing them and all outside with the beautiful winter sun. And just generally having a lovely time is the point. But at the end of it, we do have our year's supply. And then our olive oil supplier lives in the next door village, so we just put it on his truck. And they eventually find their way back to London.
Yeah, and it's amazing. One huge lemon tree can produce enough lemons, so it's sort of buckets and buckets of these preserved lemons, which we use all through the year, which is very satisfying. Wonderful. And tell us about the slow roast pork shoulder with orange and cumin. What a great combination.
Yes, well, that it's with a little bit of paprika, some cumin, a little bit of minced onion, and the orange zest, and a little bit of oregano. And then it's a shoulder boned that we just slow roast for a couple of hours in the oven, so it sort of goes to that sort of second stage, and so it's really sort of tender and melting. The meat is melting, and then the sauce and the marinade just sort of thickens as it cooks, and it's this lovely fragrant, slightly spiced, tangy sauce stroke gravy on the side. So
absolutely wonderful. 25 years of Moro. What will Moro be in another 25 years? What place will it have in British food history?
I mean, what's great, we always say, you know, at the restaurant, you're only as good as your last meal. So customers are the first to know if the food drops in quality and if it doesn't have that same panache, that same zest. So that is very much, you know, about, you know, the individuals, myself, Samantha, the training, our chefs, and all of that sort of thing. But I mean, what's great is the books do survive, and the books continue, and they're very loved, and they're very used, and so the legacy of the books probably will be greater than the restaurant because of the fact that a restaurant's only as good as your last meal. So I think, you know, that's the wonderful thing about the books, is that they always hopefully will inspire and, you know, keep the memory of Moro going.
Thanks for listening. You can read the transcripts at gillysmith.com, where you can also sign up to my newsletter. And you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at foodgillysmith, and that's where you'll find all my adventures in cookery with Leiths online. Check the show notes and on Instagram for full details of how to get Cooking the Books discounts on Leiths Essential Cookery course. And I'll see you next week.